I'm the program manager for the University of Guam School of Business and Administration, Bank of Hawaii, Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. What does that all mean? Well, UOGs are like umbrellas. School of Business, obviously, are umbrellas because we're hosted in this area. And the Bank of Hawaii provides grants every year to run this resource room and provide this type of events. And what we're really charged to do is to inspire you to become entrepreneurs, to be innovative in your businesses, and just to kind of think outside of the box. So we bring in the dean select certain groups of people or individuals to come in and to be a part of this. And you may be thinking, wait, isn't Talaya a nonprofit? Yes? Yes, they are. So they are a nonprofit, but who else here tell me, is a nonprofit also a business? Yes? No? Yes? I got a lot of yes. It is just a not-for-profit business. They take their profit, yes, they still want to make money. What do they do with it? They donate it sometimes, but usually they just put it back into their programs. Right? They take their profit back into their programs so they can reach their mission. And as we celebrate Solidarity in the United Nations this year, 2019 is the year of Indigenous languages. So it's really exciting. We're combining that to say, how on Guam are we kind of talking from a local perspective or an Indigenous perspective with business and entrepreneurship? How does that all connect? And it really connected with Talaya as a startup nonprofit, what they're doing here on the island. So they are 501c3, or they're registering as a 501c3 nonprofit organization on the island of Guam. And I'm excited. I've kind of seen their journey. So it's really exciting. Their topic today is creating an island school, reimagining education. So it's going to be super interesting. I'm really excited. And like I said, before I present this wonderful group of people, if you could just please, feel free to take pictures, videos, everything, and add a hashtag UOGs4EI, or you can hashtag Talaya. So it'd be great for them as well. So we have the president, Dr. Michael Bacala. He's here today. He's also a professor at Tomorrow Studies program at the university. Vice President Dr. Ellen, right here, also my mom. There. We have Kristen Rosario, right here. She's at GC. They're both at GC professors there. And CJ Flores Hughes, and she's also a student here at the School of Education. So anyway, I will, no further ado, I will take over and enjoy.
All right, buenas and hafide todos hamzu. And so I cannot remember the exact conversation how I became the president of this group. I may not have been at a meeting.
You were outside.
I may have been not at the table when the vote was taken, but somehow it may have been facial hair. That may have been sort of the requirement, who has the most facial hair in the group. And I clearly won. But I am here to sort of start the presentation, and we're very happy to be meeting and talking to you today. This is in a way our debut. This is sort of our premiere. We've been talking about this for a very long time, but this is the year that we just finally decided to move ahead with it, to become a nonprofit, and to really start getting out into the community and talking about this and trying to put together resources and put together a program. And so we are Talaya, Micronesia, and everyone here knows what a Talaya is, right? Can anyone here throw a Talaya? One, maybe, a couple people. That's good if you can. And so the idea, of course, behind that is the Talaya. It is a net. It is a metaphor. It is a very Micronesian and Pacific metaphor for connecting things together, right? For linking pieces and creating a mesh, creating something which you can sort of that you can create around. And so, our mission in Afamaulik, working together for the ecological, social, and educational well-being of all. And of course, in Afamaulik, hopefully you are familiar with that term. It is a Chamorro term for interdependence, for working together. And so, at the heart of sort of what Talaya is meant to be sort of creating interdependent and sustaining networks around ideas of education, environment, and so on. And our vision, develop sustainability of our island's resources, cultures, languages, and traditions. And so it is 2019, it is the year of Indigenous languages, and so how many of you can speak an Indigenous language? You may not know it if you can. Okay, let's make 2019 the year of learning Indigenous languages. Not just celebrating them, but learning them. And so in Micronesia, we are blessed with a lot of interesting, exciting languages. Even the Chamorro language is kind of cool, because the Chamorro language, it's got deep, ancient Austronesian roots, but then Chamorro also has sort of sexy, spicy Spanish in it at the same time. And what I love about the Chamorro language is the way it takes Spanish words, and then it makes it sound more Chamorro and makes it sound more Pacific. And so, learn some of our languages, learn some of your languages. If you have a heritage language, use this year to challenge yourself to learn more about your heritage language. And so this is us. If you promise to like, subscribe, and hashtag, then we will reproduce that picture of us for you here. And so, but it is not just us, although we are looking to bring more people in, snare more people in our net, in our Talaya. But we do plan, and we do have existing connections to partners throughout Micronesia. And so one of the things which is really interesting about Talaya is that a lot of stuff that you see throughout Micronesia is focused on a particular Indigenous culture, the perpetuation of a particular Indigenous language or Indigenous history. But what we hope to do is be an umbrella, although there's already Pazuta. We hope to be a net to not mix our nonprofit metaphors, a net which can sort of encapsulate a lot of different Indigenous epistemologies, Indigenous cultures and languages. So to kind of, because as I will talk about in a second, the history of the past couple hundred years has really divided the peoples, us in Micronesia, divided us, sort of made us, given us different relationships to modernization, different relationships to the United States, to Asia. And so one thing that Talaya we hope to do is sort of bring the peoples of Micronesia together around ideas of education, sustainability, the environment, culture, and so on. Okay, so this is a quote from Angel Santos. And so Angel Santos, he was a noted Chamorro activist. In his life, he was quite controversial, although he was elected into the Guam legislature. He passed away about 15, 16 years ago. But in 1994, in one of his interviews, he said, "We have been taught that we are not Chamorro, that there are no Chamorros anymore, they're all dead, and that we are Americans." In 1922, Naval Governor Dorn imposed the California school system on Guam. He wanted to make Guam a loyal possession of the U.S. I can see how they set out to do that. At the age of 5 or 6, when we entered school, we were immediately taught to memorize the Pledge of Allegiance to the U.S. We were taught to identify the 4 seasons, which we don't have on Guam, and praise all the gods above and below that we do not have winter, because I have seen pictures of what it looks like in the United States, and I mean, even Santa Claus wouldn't take his reindeer out in that cold. We were taught American history. The U.S. set out to destroy our culture, our language, our identity. And so, Angel Santos was speaking from the perspective of somebody who lived in a territory, had a particular colonial experience. The Chamorro people were the first people to be colonized in the Pacific. And so he's speaking about his experience in the school system, and then looking back on it and how he saw that it seemed that there was this larger intent, that the school system in a certain way taught an absence about him and where he comes from, and who his parents were, and his history, his language, his culture. You may have heard stories that on Guam the Chamorro language was banned in public schools before and after World War II, which is a silencing of the primary language of the people on Guam, of the indigenous language, that the history of the people is not taught, instead the history of people on the other side of the world. And when he's talking about that there are no Chamorros anymore, they're all dead, it's interesting because he's first of all talking about how historians would say there's no more Chamorros because Chamorros were wiped out by colonization, But what he's also saying is that you kind of learned that you didn't exist in your very educational process, in the way in which they taught you, and that they didn't teach you what was outside the windows of your own classroom, but instead they taught you about a place on the other side of the world. So they didn't tell you, these are the trees that you find on Guam. These are the trees that you find throughout Micronesia. Instead, they said, this is an oak, this is a redwood. Maybe one day you'll get to see a redwood. I mean, I'm sure they're very cool, but we also have cool trees on Guam and in Micronesia. Yeah, we got cool trees too. And so I want to, it may be hard to sort of see the text. This is a poem by a Samoan called Kidnapped, and it can kind of help us understand the larger structure of what Angel Santos was talking about. I was 6 when Mama was careless. She sent me to school alone, 5 days a week. One day, I was kidnapped by a band of Western philosophers armed with glossy pictured textbooks and registered reputations, holder of BA and MA degrees. I was held in a classroom guarded by Churchill and Garibaldi, pinned up on one wall, and Hitler and Mao dictating from the other. Guevara pointed a revolution at my brains from his guerrilla warfare. Each 3-month term, they sent threats to my mama and papa. Mama and papa loved their son and paid ransom fees each time. Each time, mama and papa grew poorer and poorer, and my kidnappers grew richer and richer. I grew whiter and whiter. On my release, 15 years after, I was handed, among loud applause from fellow victims, a piece of paper to decorate my walls, certifying my release. And so this poem offers an interesting juxtaposition. It is clearly about a school, but it could also be about a prison. It could also be about somebody's experience being held against their will and being brainwashed and forced to accept somebody else's rules, worldview, and system. And so, in the Pacific, in Micronesia, education, as we know it, comes in with this quality. If we look at when the first schools started by the Spanish throughout the islands, the intent was to get you away from your culture, to get you away from your beliefs, and to make you accept somebody else's. Do we see elements of that in our school system today? I'm assuming many of you may have gone to school on Guam in the public school system. Did you find that a lot of it was detached from the island or from the region? Did you find that it wasn't really connected to your life in a lot of ways? You can say, yes, I won't tell anyone, don't worry. We'll cover the mics. We'll cover the mics. Your teachers won't know. But, so if you think about it, what is the purpose of education? Is the purpose of education to make you forget where you come from? That seems like a really stupid goal, but that's what education was when it first came in. And so we need to think, does education still perform that? Because this is a very fascinating poem, and if you ever get a chance to sit and read and analyze it, you'll see that it shows the complicated relationship that we have with education as well. Because you don't send your kids to school because you hate them, you send them to school because you love them. Mama and Papa loved their son and paid their ransom fees every time. But when I was 6, Mama was careless. She sent me to school. And so at the same time, it says that there is something about education. You have to be cautious about what is being taught. Because here, Mama and Papa, as this person progresses through their educational system, their parents grow poorer and poorer. What does that mean, that they grew poorer and poorer? It means that as this, somebody raising their hand, I saw somebody was going to raise their hand. Very true. Very true. Anybody else? What does that mean? It's a powerful line. And you may feel it in your own life, too. Because if you're a first generation person on Guam, if you're the first generation in your family to go to school on Guam, you may feel that the educational system is alienating. But so that idea, it's really that because the school system comes from a radically different place than your family does, that as you go through it, you will see your family as offering you less and less that's important in life, and you will start to trust these fancy names, these fancy degrees, and that you will become disconnected from the land, you will become disconnected from the family, and you will start to see where you came from, your culture, your language, your island, as being less important compared to these big things that you learned about in school. And so, this is why we feel that Talaya and sort of this larger goal is very important. Because education doesn't have to disconnect us from where we come from. It doesn't have to teach us and convince us that we're somebody else. It can support where we come from, and it can teach us to be successful in the world around us and with our neighbors around us. And it can teach us to be successful, most of all, in the way that we want to, which is aligned with our values. Okay? And so, okay, that is it. I have to run.
No, what? Okay. Okay, thank you.
I'm the president.
Okay, so some of the things that we're looking at in terms of Talaya, in terms of the larger Micronesian community, we're looking at different projects that we can help and support. So some of those things are projects that are being carried out right now in Micronesia on some of our islands. So one that I know of is in Yap, in a small, tiny little village called Toru. Anybody know anything about Yap? I'm saying yes, okay. So up in Mop, on the island of Mop, next to Bachil. Do you know Toru? Okay, awesome. So when I was there in December, they have traditional canoes there, and they were bringing in some of the young people from the high school and the college, and they are trying to support the ideas of, still building and using the canoes. And so when I talked to the man there who was kind of heading that up, he said, we've run out of funds, we really want to continue doing this, but the island, as everywhere, is becoming more and more dependent on funds and money, right? We're not going to do it just because they need to do it because they need money. So he said, we're really looking to how we can get more funds to help us in our efforts to keep our traditional projects and things alive and going. Another thing that we're looking at is about promoting sustainability throughout Micronesia. So when I talk about sustainability, of course, I'm also including the environment. And so I took this course, it was called Education for Sustainability. It was through the Green School in Bali, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. So the idea is that you link your learning to your place where you are and the importance of it. You make more connections with where you are so that you want to protect it more as well. And so we're looking at possibility of doing some workshops here in Guam as well as throughout our island brothers and sisters and the different islands. And then, of course, we have our island school. And these are just some of the reasons that we're looking at. Oh, it shifted the pictures around. Oh, okay, that's okay. But in terms of some of the main things that we're looking at would be to promote our indigenous languages. So even in islands like in Yap and Palau and Ponape, a lot of the shift has been to English. And in fact, if you know, on our islands, English is one of the official languages, which is not necessarily so in the U.S. And the U.S. does not even have an official language. So it's kind of interesting that some of our islands here are promoting it to that point, to the detriment of our own languages. And also looking at how we can support cultural identities and which is linked to self-esteem. Acknowledging the knowledge and experience that students bring into educational settings. So a lot of times we think that they come in without knowing anything, but really we all come in knowing something, and especially from our own cultural backgrounds. Encouraging relationship between youth and their environment. It was interesting, last year on Earth Day, there long story short, there was some garbage, and I had my hands full with garbage that I had been picking up at the beach. And so I walked by, and there was some garbage next to where somebody put their bottle of water and this and that. So I asked the people, I said, is this your garbage here? And he said, no. I said, well, can you take it out? As I've got all this garbage in my hand, right? And he said, but it's not mine. And it kind of reflects that attitude that, you know, people, we've grown up to think that, you know, it's not ours. You know, we're disconnected from our land in many ways, especially when we see it as property, something to sell and buy, rather than something that we are actually really strongly connected to. Research-based approach to learning, so we're looking at things like place-based learning, the way that multilingualism can enhance brain development, authentic experiences rather than textbook experiences, diverse modalities of learning, so more engaging outdoors interaction, and the importance of play and social interactions. Instead, if you come in the classroom and everybody's supposed to be quiet, that's not how our brains function. You know, our brains function and learn through social interactions. So we're looking at including a lot more of those kind of components. Of course, also the value of ASL and for our deaf and hard of hearing youth as well as other youth. So ways that they can use even ASL as a kind of common language and also in supporting our deaf and hard of hearing community. And inclusion of elders as mentors and teachers. And I think oftentimes we forget this, is we forget about what we can still learn from our elders and how that also helps them to feel more connected with their youth, with the, you know, the things that they can teach us, including language, including values and things like that. So those are just some of the basic ideas of why we really want to push forward with more of this island school. So one question would come up, and you can see the different pictures. So you have a regular classroom setting and somebody that we would think of as an educated person, and then you have some other more island-based learning situations. So one question, and I always ask this in my education courses, is, you know, how would you define education and what does it mean to be an educated person? Anybody want to put that out? You guys are so quiet. It's like not even Monday. Everyone's quiet. Yes, sir.
Someone who is well-rounded or is an expert on a field.
Okay, that's great. It could be any field then. Anything else?
Sometimes degree or certificate.
That's often how it's perceived, right? Anything else? Qualified to get a job. Okay. Because it depends on how you think of education as to then what kind of schooling that you would want for your children and the generations to come, right? So if you think it means about getting a job or getting a degree, you know, that's kind of one mindset. But if it's about learning in general, learning how to solve problems, learning how to better communicate, then it might kind of take, excuse me, kind of a different angle, right? So just real quickly, I know Dr. Kavako touched on some of this, but when he talked about when, like, you had the colonizers come into all of the different places around the world, there were already educational programs in place, and traditional communities, they were always involved in educating their children as a means of carrying on self-sustainability, right, to survive. And so a lot of theirs was about being everything connected. There was a need for balancing and taking care of each other, because as a community, you all needed to survive, right? So how could you help each other survive? And this then was starting to change when you bring in the Western idea of what should be, you know, what should be included in education in terms of just the philosophies. So Western thinking is that humans are superior over other things, other creatures. It's a control and profit from resources. This man, his name is Wade Davis, he's a cultural anthropologist, and he talks about when he lived in British Columbia, and he said, you know, he was brought up to believe that the forests were there to be cut and, you know, to make money from. And he said, while the Native American community, that forest was there, it was part of the spirits that they believed were important. It was their sustainability. So just different mindsets, right? Accumulation, to accumulate and consume resources. That's kind of how we're all brought up. How many of us, are drinking water that's bottled versus from the tap? That's just one little example. And the needs are driven by the market. Whereas over here, the needs were driven more by the balance within the community for everybody to survive. Different kinds of ideologies also in terms of the indigenous and traditional views of education. It was more holistic, more functional, what you needed to do to survive. It was based on the needs of community, whereas in Western philosophy, it's more based on the needs of industry. And in fact, there are many quotes by early educators where, it talks about that education was driven by the demands of market, what they needed to make their profits. That's what all of your education has really been. The K-12 is driven by the college, and the colleges are driven by corporations. Indigenous communities base their learning and their focus, their values on interdependence with each other and with nature. In the Western philosophy, it's more competition. And I think you all understand that, right? Process-based, so it was more about the process of what you're doing, how you're doing it, learning through that process, as opposed to an outcome or test-based kind of philosophy. In indigenous communities, everybody filled a niche, whereas in Western philosophy, it was everyone is at the same standard. So, for example, the whole concept of learning disability is really a Western creation. In indigenous communities, we didn't have students that were learning disabled. It wasn't until we said all children must read this to this level by this age, or they're going to be identified as having a learning disability. So if you think about that, that was a creation of Western society. Whereas in an indigenous community, if somebody wasn't really good at one thing, then they may go and do something else. So it was everybody kind of contributing in that way. So if you take island school, we actually have a little acronym here thing, right? So island schools for localization and natural development, with a mission of connecting learning to every language, every culture, and every child. And the vision is to equip our island's community members as creative, innovative leaders in sustainability of our island's resources, cultures, languages, and traditions. So in a sense, driving the idea of entrepreneurship and developing new ideas and thoughts about ways to deal with the situations that we have today and that may come up in the future. So just very quickly to go through, so it's always going to be kind of like the circle idea, and if you think about it, I think almost all indigenous communities, it was based more on a holistic or circle idea rather than a flat line. So looking at how we are all Micronesian islands, and yet our children come into our schools and right away they're told that they're supposed to be this way, and they're supposed to talk in this language, and they're supposed to, learn about these leaders and these resources. But we want to be more inclusive, and I didn't list all of the islands up here, but in terms of just the idea that it's looking at us all more holistically and connected. One of the ideas in our island school would be that it would base more on centers, learning centers. So part of the day would be outdoors in these center areas, where you would have maybe a central area where children could choose, have choices about things that they want to learn more about. So they might be involved in dance, canoe building, weaving with plants, weaving fabric. And then you would have like whole group kind of activities and lessons like gardening and fishing and paddling and things like that. And then part of the day they would be, and I have it in different colors, it's the same, but showing that like for one student, maybe their native language is, I don't know, I'm going to say Chuukese. And so their second language, they may be learning English, for example. And then you would also have a math component because, of course, you do need to establish certain numeracy and literacy skills. But we think that it's important to link both their native language as well as the language that they're learning. But for some children, it may be coming in their native language is English, and they want to learn another language. Maybe they want to learn Chamorro. So that would be another part of that. So it would be where they could be in their areas learning their first language and then the language they want to learn, and then including that in math. And I think one of the problems that we have is where if you have students coming in from, say, some of the other islands, and maybe their English fluency isn't, it doesn't enable them to access the other learning that's taking place in the schools. So if I'm coming in and I'm from an outer island in Yap, and maybe my English isn't that good, and I'm put into a regular classroom, and I can't understand what you're talking about when you're talking about math. I know the numbers, but I may not get all of the instruction or conversation. Although that should be a lot more hands-on, that's another whole conversation. But in terms of other things like social studies and science, and that we would always try to incorporate that in with the center activities. So just to give you a broad idea of what we're looking at, so it's not a classroom sitting, you know, inside all the time. It's a lot more interactive, outdoors, engaged in things that are coming from our culture, but that we can learn from. Like you can learn about plants, you're learning science. If you're doing weaving, you're also learning math. You're also learning problem solving. You're communicating. And the same with dance and some of these other things, right? So it'd be more like learning in that way. If you were to take, you'd have like one kind of central theme, like for every, I don't know, 9 weeks or something like that, however you felt it worked best for your school. Then you would have like a certain theme, and all the children would be kind of focused on that theme, but at different levels and in different subjects. So it'd be all a lot more interdisciplinary, rather than you're only learning language here, you're only learning science there, or whatever. So you would try to integrate it a lot more through things, including storytelling in with your language arts course. So a lot of this would be, but all based on a certain type of theme, and then you would incorporate that into your different centers. So just as briefly, and I know I don't want to keep you too long here, but in terms of just me talking, but looking at, say, if you had a theme of oceans. So for kindergartners, first grade, you might have themes about legends, just brief writing about what they're learning about, or whole class kind of creative writing. You would have language, different, in their first language, their second language, and ASL, like learning the words that go with that theme. IT, yes, you still would use IT, right, in terms of looking up information, but at this level it might be pictures. I think even Bella can do that one, right? She's pretty good with that. Or acting out legends. So you just want to have a lot more engagement and the arts with it. And then each level would be a little bit different though, right? So you'd have a little bit more expectation, of course, as they go up. So this one you would go more into sciences, you would bring in certain type of reading materials, for example, and then as you go up, it would be, now I'm going to include a novel that relates to oceans and things like that, and they're going to do more in terms of writing and things like that. So again, it's just taking that whole, like everybody in the school is kind of learning under that umbrella, so everybody is connected. And if the younger children need help and support, or the ones that may be struggling in certain areas, then those that can help, You have it a lot more connected like a family. Some of the things that you may do in terms of the whole school then, where it would be that you would have them presenting what they're doing with each other. Again, older students or those that may know one thing more than another, and some kids are better at drawing or whatever, so you have them working with each other. Incorporating field trips, bringing in local fishermen to help the students, like looking at fish and letting them experiment with nets, looking at the kind of foods that we have and how can they prepare those foods, bringing in your community elders to share their knowledge and their views and their stories, and then maybe having a contest about taking care of the ocean, a poster contest. So just some things to give you an idea that what we're looking at, and this is backed up by brain research, is how when you connect the learning experiences together, the kids will learn more. So I saw this, I know, even in different places where I've been, but when you connect it to their experience and when you interrelate the different disciplines, so to speak, of learning, then kids are more, you want to use the word successful, they are more engaged and they will learn more. Now, this, I just have a brief video, so I need to get out of this because it wouldn't upload into there, and then we'll move it over to Ms. Kirsten. And hopefully this is going to work. Excuse my editing. I'm not the best. We need an editor. One of the projects we're doing is making a documentary on education on Guam based on interviews. And it's
Yeah, play it again.
but the results are showing otherwise. Even with the
Sorry, I just asked to play it again, Doctor.
Yeah. Ooh, girl, you go.
Okay, let's try that.
All right.
educating for
Oh, more.
Western freedom of education.
Okay, let's try that.
Maybe we should have done that.
All the way to the front. Okay.
Crank it up to 11.
111, what?
Come on.
Keep going. Keep going.
Almost there.
You wanna try it?
Okay,
Yeah.
we got it.
Educating for 100 years of this Western freedom of education. We should have gotten down pat already. But the results are showing otherwise. Even with 100 years of American education, it's not necessarily showing the results that we want. Oh, what are the reasons for that? And for some reason, every single time, even now as an educator, we just have this mentality that everything outside our Guam is better. Everything that's coming from the States is going to be better for us. But it doesn't reflect anything around us. It's just,
It should be the other way around.
it should be the other way around.
They take
Figure out what the knowledge base is. If you have an island-based
Sorry, he kept banging on the table.
curriculum about society, about culture, about the physical environment, and you say, this is what I know as a base from which I will engage the world, then you have a healthy system. But if you say, that's not important and it's insignificant and that's for other people to know, then you don't have a healthy system and you don't have a healthy society.
that education should be about discovery. And so, it should be very important for a person, especially a child, to discover fully who they are in their bodies and in their community and in this world. And so it should start with a deep knowledge of where they're at, and it should be relevant, and it should be rooted in their culture and their belief systems, and then extend out, right? So it's, I've noticed, especially being a publisher and interested in publishing books for our students, that some of the initial resistance that people will have, just sort of in conversation about it, would be, well, won't they sort of miss out if they're not learning about the United States, or if they're not learning about other places? Isn't there this expectation that they're supposed to know all these other things in order to succeed? And that's very much from a colonized mentality. And so my argument is that they can learn about themselves and their place in the world, and also connect to other places as well. It doesn't limit them, right? And that what we experience in our history and our stories and our environment is relevant, and it will help them succeed because it starts there.
And if I don't know who would not want to include more culturally relevant material and teaching. I don't know who wouldn't want to do that. So, but we do have a problem. If there's a disconnect, a big disconnect in the material, and a lot is standardized test driven, unfortunately.
What are they looking at? Coconut trees? What are they looking at? Breadfruit trees? Why don't they know anything about the breadfruit? Why don't they know much about the coconut trees? Why aren't they so disassociated to these two very fundamental food staples, not only in Guam, but in the entire Oceania? Why are they learning about the maple trees? Why are they learning about the cherry trees, the oak trees? What is that to them? The redwood trees. And you're mind is your first observation of what you begin to accumulate in your mind, and you're processing this. Okay, but you ask the younger, more children today, even about a coconut tree, and they don't have the same information that I have, because I grew up, I learned about it, the many uses, the many, what do you call that, stages of the coconut that were very important to the Chamorro culture. And my parents ensured that we knew that. And so what's the, what are these textbooks doing?
The green school in Bali takes green to the next level. Built in the middle of the jungle, it's nearly completely from bamboo. The school runs a recycling center that also operates in the surrounding community. It generates its own energy to meet big part of its needs and grows organic food for its vegetarian school lunches. The school raises a generation of children who live mindfully and actively care for the earth.
I, integrity, R, responsibility, E, empathy, S, sustainability, P, peace, E, equality or equity, C, community, and T, trust, and all those things play a role in green school.
The decade-old school applies a holistic academic approach, from kindergarten through to high school. They focus on three key frames of learning: thematic, proficiency, and experiential.
Instead of just reading a book and seeing the pictures and learning the facts, we get to see it happen live out there, and we get to feel the animals, we get to experience it with all five senses.
The school also has a strong international appeal, with parents from around the world moving to Bali to give their children this progressive educational experience.
The reason we came to Bali was driven by the kids originally, because John Hardy came to their school to visit, and we came to Bali, saw the school, and they said, wow, if we could actually ever study here, that would be a great thing. We have these integrated, what are called Jalan thematic learning approaches, where you're learning actually how, from a beginning to an end, how a project works. You know, you're integrating economics, you're integrating biology, you're integrating different aspects of science learning and working with your peers and collaborating at a level we haven't seen before.
There's still plenty of work in progress at the school, but Darwiyati truly hopes that green schools will be replicated in other parts of the globe.
I think it deserves to have this kind of education around the world, so that we can have more green leaders that we dream of.
So this is a school that we've been communicating with, and we're hoping to bring some of those same ideas here to a school in Guam, the island school. So focusing on how kids can learn to take care of their environment, to sustain their languages and their cultures in a very holistic way. And so that's part of what we are hoping then to bring here to Guam as well. And with that, just get out of here because I think you're next.
And then speaking about the Bali School, I'm an undergraduate here at UOG, and I'm taking a class. It's SO 405 Community Development with Dr. J. He's sitting right here. And in our Bali Field School, we're going to have some unstructured days and some structured days. And so what I would really like to do is on my unstructured days, I'd love to go to the Bali Green School and you know, network and get some resources and, you know, make some interviews, make connections, and then eventually bring those resources back home to help our nonprofit. So it's going to be exciting.
Yeah, we all want to go to Bali, right?
Yes.
Okay, and then we have Miss Kirsten.
So, hi everybody, my name is Kirsten Rosario. I am over at GCC with the American Sign Language courses, and we also brand newly, after 18 years, have restarted our sign language interpreting certificate program. So we are producing and more interpreters for deaf and hard of hearing community. This has always been a focus. I'm an educator too as well, but I teach a lot differently than I guess a regular educator would. A lot of the things I do in my classroom relates to a lot of the things the Green School Vision is about. Our deaf and hard of hearing children here on Guam are very visual language learners, which is why sign language was created almost, gosh, since the 1800s. On Guam, there was a big breakout back in 1960s with German measles. So women that got pregnant during that time in 1960s, their children were born deaf. So there had to be a mandatory start of a deaf and hard of hearing program here on Guam in 1969 at the new PD school, which then was a deaf and hard of hearing program at that time, but had branched out to separate the deaf children and the hard of hearing children. So the hard of hearing children were learning oral communication, which is lip reading. How many of you guys have heard of a lip reading class? Never. Okay. So, which was really tough, and it still is. It's still a big controversy of why they're learning how to lip read versus learning sign language. But we do have our deaf program still around, which is still named as Deaf and Hard of Hearing. And these deaf kids go to school. They're mainstream. They learn about 90 minutes of the day, English and sign language, and they are mainstreamed then out into regular classrooms. This has been a big issue in the education here on Guam and throughout the Pacific. Actually, I am a student also with Marshall Islands, College of Marshall Islands. I'm there on a free scholarship, pretty much, to do deaf studies and deaf education. And what I found out is even my friends on the islands are having this difficulty too in trying to promote visual language at an early age. So they have, actually, Chuk has started a deaf and hard of hearing school, a full immersion school. Everything is taught in sign language. Teachers are deaf. One-to-one aides are deaf. They've given jobs, given opportunities out in the Pacific to these islands. So Chuk has a deaf school, a fully emerging one, and Marshall Island has two with eBay. But we're also thinking about something like that for Guam. So language access is a big thing, in not in only sign language, but in all the languages. So we definitely need that going on here. So I'm going to show you a little video clip of what I put together. I've done lots of work out there. I teach ASL, and so I know my students are aware of some of these things, but I'd like you also to see what we have in store. So I don't know. Oh.
Oh, put it in present mode.
Present.
Top right. There we go.
Inasoku, Imasakalo, Ikurason, Zani Maspiku, Nanina Senor, who oppressed myself para Baikutsei, Zanu Defendi, Ihinengi, Ikutsura, Ilengwani, Iai, Ihan, Zanita.
Okay, we're stopping now. Thank you guys. This is something I've been working on. It's also very it's been such a journey to put things like this together for deaf and hard of hearing children, but it's still needed. I would love someday, and I hope this is why we're doing this, is to bring them together and break the barriers between the hearing and the deaf world, or all languages in that sense. All kids deserve connectivity. It doesn't matter where they come from. But that this would also even provide parents the resources they need to learn how to communicate with their kids on a daily basis, which is something they struggle with every day now. Language deprivation has been a big issue within the deaf community and a lot of our native language speakers. So we then want to teach them young, and we want to start teaching them while they're still here on what the benefits are to have inclusive and a least restricted environment. Thank you again for giving me the opportunity to bring this on. I know you saw some interesting things there. I got to work with a lot of artists over the summer, creating a deaf cultural day camp for our kids. So I got to take them out to Talaya Falls, give them a chance to collaborate with Haral, teach them a little bit of Chamorro, our culture, through traditions. They even had a religious aspect there too that was very interesting. I got to work with my uncle, Rob Tiaco, who just walked in. He's just right over here. My uncle Rob, we knew growing up that he was a seafarer, and this is something he liked to do, and he loved to learn about the culture, and that now his family is growing, and he'd like to come back and teach our kids too. So giving them the opportunity to do these things. Working with deaf artists out there that do things like this. They weave. I have deaf painters out there. I have even deaf people who enjoy music and can't hear it. So there's some things about connecting each other. Assistive technology is still something we utilize all the time, our cell phones, things like that. All these things will be implemented. We just want to make sure that we give back the kids the support, our elders, and the people that really need something to help them thrive. Thank you. Yeah. So let me go back to the presentation.
Oh, yeah.
And it's back to
Back in?
no.
Or not?
Yeah, next slide. Oh, there you go.
Okay. So now we get to where we're going to have you guys, instead of just sitting there, but we're going to have and invite you to give us some of your thoughts and ideas. So we have some questions done up. I would say whatever you can answer as a group, that would be great. You can all work together rather than doing your own individual papers as well, right? So maybe one at each table, but we might have maybe some smaller groups join up together.
If you're sitting by yourself, like back there.
Come up this way.
Move over to.
And we're just going to go through this. So do you think an island school is needed and why? So I don't know if there's anything here you might not understand. What would be your suggestions on the best way to start out? So one of the things that we were doing was working on the Education of Guam documentary to bring that into the community to facilitate more conversation. How could we fund this kind of an island school? And how much should there be a fee, and how much should it be? And what are some effective ways to advertise the school? So we invite your input, and we'll be coming around and sitting with you as well to hear what you're talking about.